This is May 25th, 2020. I'm with my guest, Venerable Panabasa Mahatera. He's been a monk in Burma for almost 20 years, now 30 years a monk. So was it 30 years or 29 years been a monk now?
I've been in Burma for more than 20 years, and I've been a monk for more than 29, but not 30 yet.
Okay, very good. So, yeah, I thought I'd ask you about the history of Burma. That's a big question. I think a lot of Westerners just don't know. It's like one of 200 countries in the world. It's a big interest to me in terms of Buddhist history as well. So let's start with that. What's the history of Burma from an American perspective, American monk in Burma perspective?
Yeah, well, getting back to what you said before we get started, is one reason why I think it could be useful is because most people are just clueless with regard to Burma. Like probably most people in the West couldn't even locate it on a map. And then like even people that are relatively well informed that I like watching, like on YouTube or BitChute, like Styx Hexenhammer. You know, he's generally well informed, and he usually has really good ideas. He's good at seeing the big picture, and you know, it almost gives him like this prophetic talent or something, that he can see the big picture, and he makes, you know, really good predictions and that sort of thing. But whenever he opens his mouth about Burma, he just like puts his foot in his mouth because he really doesn't understand what he's talking about. So it's kind of cringy whenever he mentions Burma. And most people are the same way. It's like almost all they know about Burma is just little bits and pieces from like news headlines, which are mostly just propaganda.
Yeah, really negative now too about the Muslim.
Yeah. It's like I mentioned Burma, and sometimes people, like Western people, will say, "Oh, that's the place where the Buddhists are slaughtering the Rohingyas," or this sort of thing.
Yeah.
And even, you know, when there is stuff happening like that, you know, it's way off. Like, you know, it's isolated in like one part of Burma, where the rest of the country is still, you know, just business as usual. So, yeah, I mean,
it's very skewed. I know Time magazine had a front cover about that. It was very misleading.
Yeah, definitely. And it's mostly just propaganda, because people are jumping at the opportunity to point the finger at non-Muslim terrorists or non-Muslim aggression or whatever.
Yeah, spread the hate around.
Yeah, I guess they want equality of what, atrocities or something. So yeah, I lived in Burma for more than 20 years, and so you know, when I hear people just kind of speak cluelessly about the country, it just kind of makes me feel a little like uncomfortable, just like wanting to butt in and start, you know, correcting them or something.
Yeah, you must care about Burma. I mean, that was your country for 20 years. It's described as the most Buddhist country in the world as well.
Yeah, it probably is. I think it almost certainly is the most devoutly Buddhist country in the world. Yeah. And I mean, it's got its good points and its bad points. So, I mean, in some ways, it's superior to the West, like traditional Burmese culture in certain ways. Not
they're happier people, right? Remember a previous video you talked about how your typical American city is a lot of unhappy faces compared to Burmese town.
Yeah, well, that's one of the things I learned, is that these Burmese villagers, like subsistence farmers, who live, you know, they're making like the equivalent of maybe less than $2 per day, and they're living in a shack with maybe 3 generations of a family living in like one big room or just a few rooms in this shack, you know, no electricity, no running water. And, you know, it's like a dirt road in front of their house, and like, you know, barking dogs and naked babies and chickens and goat turds and stuff everywhere. And it's just noisy as hell. But even then, these people have less suffering in their lives than the average Western city dweller.
It's true, isn't it? They're happier people.
Yeah, I mean, you just see that they just got like these bright, shining, joyful faces, and when they smile, it's like a real smile. It's not like this fake plastic thing that you stick on to be polite. It's like this genuine smile. So yeah, from a Buddhist point of view, it's not hard to figure out, because it's like you know, the Four Noble Truths. It's like desire is the cause of all suffering, and they've just got an amazing lack of desire. You know, just what they're willing to. They're so patient. They're patient as like cows sometimes. They just put up with stuff that us Westerners just don't put up with.
Yeah.
You know, like they have these, they're like blasting cheesy pop music or chanting monks or something over these loudspeakers. And it's so loud that the people living next door, it must be the teacups are just rattling on the shelves. It's so loud. But nobody really complains about it. Whereas in America, anyone tries that stuff, within 30 minutes, the cops are going to be banging on the door.
Yeah, I think I would complain about that. Let's have some respect for the monks.
Yeah, and I'm a Westerner too. There's been times I've been just lying there fantasizing about just taking a baseball bat or a big stick and just not smashing people, but just smashing their PA system. Gosh, there was one time in particular, I had been living in this forest cave for a long time where there's noise, but it's like animal noises and stuff, you know. And then I'm going to leave that place and go somewhere else. So I spend a couple nights in the village at a monastery, and this guy there was just blasting pop music just over this loudspeaker.
Was he outside the monastery?
He was in the monastery. He was
in the monastery,
the main Dharma hall. Well, that's just the way it goes in Burma.
Was this a lay person?
Yeah, he was like an army guy who was working on building a bridge or something there. He was like an army officer overseeing the work on this bridge or something like that.
Oh, so he was staying there, hanging out there.
Yeah. He was
blasting his music.
Staying there. Yeah, and I was just like pacing back and forth like a caged leopard. I was just climbing the walls and just going nuts, you know, until finally I go, okay, at 11 o'clock p.m., if he's still blasting this, I'm just going to go in there and stop it. Because I was sort of like the highest prestige person in that area, because I was like the famous, mysterious Western monk who lives in the cave in the forest, you know.
They thought you were an arahant, some of them, right?
Some of them did, yeah. And so 11 o'clock and he's still going strong. And so I just march in there and I just say, that's enough, you know, Dolby. But he's like listening to the music, he doesn't hear it. So then I say it louder and just go over and just rip the wires out of the back of the speaker. And
Great.
He didn't put up a fight or anything, so I succeeded in that case. But there've been lots of times when I've just...
So it worked. At that point, he just quieted down.
Yeah, and it's not just a Burmese thing. I think in third world countries in general, for some reason, people just don't mind noise. I think a lot of people even like just having this noise blasting in the background.
I saw that in Thailand. I lived there for like 4 years, from 1992 to 96. Saw a lot of that too. And it's, like you're right next to a shoe store, then you have this blasting away and there's a monastery nearby and nobody seems to care, you know?
Yeah. In fact, one time there were some monks at a monastery about half a mile away from my cave or the place where I was staying. And every morning at like 3:30 a.m., they would start blasting this chanting. And it was kind of, the sound kind of came over a river, and sound travels well over water for some reason. And so I just couldn't sleep. I'd just be lying there listening to this, chanting Abhidhamma and stuff. And finally, I complained to the village, or like the village headman. I mean, it's like, can they turn it down a little bit? And people were just amazed by that. They were just kind of stunned that a monk would be complaining about monks chanting this, because it's like for the protection of the village, you know.
Oh, I see. Yeah.
So
how dare you?
They think it's good. Well, it wasn't like how dare you, but they're just like, they didn't get it at all. They were just like confused that a monk would be complaining about something.
Well, yeah. Because why would you object to protecting the village, right?
Yeah, but
the louder the better, right?
Yeah, and it's like the Western point of view is like religion isn't just like this outward noise and stuff going on. It's like, if you're practicing Buddhism, especially, you want like peace and quiet and solitude and
yeah.
And so it's just a completely different approach. Like Buddhism, that's another topic we can talk about, is just how Burmese Buddhism or Asian Buddhism is different from Western Buddhism.
Yeah, that's on our to-do list of talks in the future. That was one of them.
Yeah.
Do another one on that.
So this one is just going to be about Burma in general, just sort of like an overview of, like Burmese history, and then maybe talk about what it was like living under the military dictatorship.
Yeah, that would be interesting for people.
Yeah, because the military dictatorship ended right about the same time that I left Burma in 2011. Although I've been back there a couple of times since then.
Yeah, you could compare. Yeah, it started like 1962 around that time, right?
The military dictatorship started around then. So originally in Burma, throughout most of Southeast Asia, the first Homo sapiens that lived there were like Australoids. You know, it's like the ancestors of the Australian Aborigines before they reached Australia.
Oh, let's talk about that. Go all the way back. I like that. The earliest.
This is going back to like 50,000 years ago, where the first wave of Homo sapiens comes through, and they populated like India, South Asia, Southeast Asia, finally got to Australia, and then after that, like 40,000 BC, something like that, the next wave of somewhat more advanced Homo sapiens came through and outcompeted the Australoids everywhere except Australia. So they're like the marsupials, where the marsupials get outcompeted by the placental mammals everywhere except Australia mostly. And because they just didn't reach there yet. And it's pretty much the same with the Aborigines. They just didn't get outcompeted in Australia because the other ones hadn't really got there yet. Yeah. So they had to wait for the English to show up for that. So there still are like Australoid people, or you can obviously see that they've got some Australoid ancestry in Southeast Asia. So there's like a stratification of like races, or kind of into like class system. It's not really a caste system like in India, but it kind of works that way, where at the top you've got like East Asian, like people of Chinese ancestry who live in Burma, like most of the Burmese people that have come to America and are living like here in California. It seems to me like most of them are like at least part Chinese, because the Chinese have like an average IQ of like 105, something like that. Australoids, it's down in the 60s, and then like the average Southeast Asian, it's I've read that it's somewhere around 90. And so someone with like a high IQ, like a Chinese person, they're just going to rise to the top naturally.
Yeah, I didn't know there's Australoids in Burma. Like, how similar do they look to the Aboriginals in Australia?
Well, they're not really pure-blooded. You can just tell that,
mixed, right?
like a lot of the villagers, out in the sticks, you can just tell they've got like kind of like big eyebrow or like brow ridge, and their hair is kind of wavy and kind of turns reddish in the sun. They've got kind of like the mouth that kind of prognathus. Yeah, protrudes.
This is from 50,000 years ago then, right?
That was supposedly, they were like the first inhabitants. And then the way it generally works is whenever you have a wave of migrants that come in, they just they don't just exterminate the people that are already there or just completely drive them out. I mean, a lot of them probably die off, but still there's going to be a certain amount of interbreeding, just with like the horny invader males just taking one of the indigenous females as a mate or that sort of thing, so that there's Australoid blood in pretty much throughout Southeast Asia, and especially in like the remote villages where you can see it the most.
I wonder why it'd be more in the remote villages than the cities. Why would that be?
Because the cities, it's like people that rise to the top wind up in the village. It's like I noticed
they go to the city.
Like out in the remote villages, there's not very many pretty girls, because the pretty girls tend to get married to, I mean, they can marry a city guy, and then or a guy from town, and then they get to move into town where they're living at a higher standard of living.
Of course, that's it.
So you can live at a higher standard of living in town. I mean, not necessarily. I mean, there's slums and ghettos and stuff, but still, you can live at a much higher standard of living if you're in a town or city than if you're living in a village with just like dirt roads and no electricity and no running water.
I guess that explains why I came from like a small town in Ontario. Now I live in a big city. I guess because I'm so good looking, I suppose that must be the reason.
Yeah. Something like that. So anyway, that was like the first wave, and then you had I assume like the the next wave of people were similar to like the Muns and the Cambodians. They're called what, Australasian, and they're like the Malays and the Indonesians. It's all kind of the same general race or sub-race of people, and then, but that doesn't include the Burmese. The Muns who live in southern Burma belong to the Australasian group of human ethnicities. But the Burmese, I'm not exactly sure when they came to Burma, but they came from, they're related to the Tibetans. So they come from like the foothills of the Himalayas. And then they migrated in different waves. There was another wave that
They look similar to Tibetans, don't they?
Kind of. I haven't.
Yeah.
They speak a Tibeto-Burmese language. So their language is related to Tibetan, although the words that I've seen translated from Tibetan into English, they don't seem to be very similar to the Burmese words. You know, like
what about their alphabet? Is the alphabet similar to Tibetan?
Maybe. Yeah.
I mean, just looking at it seems that way.
But the Burmese didn't adopt their alphabet until they came to Burma, so it wouldn't necessarily be the same kind of alphabet. Although it might, I assume it could be based on the same Indian alphabet, because the Burmese alphabet is based on an alphabet from India. And I suppose I should say that like just about any civilization is going to be partly based on an older classical civilization. Like in the West here, we're based mainly on Rome. You know, we've got the Roman religion, which is Christianity. We've got Roman forms of government and the legal systems. We've got the Roman calendar. Even pretty much have Roman hairstyles and stuff. You know, the guys have short hair and they shave their beards like the ancient Romans did, whereas like the Greeks had long hair and beards, sort of like the ancient Indians did. So the Burmese, their classical culture, they rely on for you know, a lot of their civilization is India, which is one reason why they're Buddhist. And Thailand, it's sort of a combination of India and China more, I think. The farther east you go, like Cambodia or especially like Vietnam, then there's a lot less Indian classical culture and a lot more Chinese classical culture. But in Burma, it's almost all India, based on India.
I see. Makes sense.
Yeah, and so their alphabet is based on some ancient Indian alphabet, and of course their religion also, and a lot of their language is based on like Sanskrit and Pali, a little bit of Hindi. So yeah, I'm not exactly sure when the Burmese invaded Burma, but it was like I don't know, maybe 500 AD, 700 AD, something like that. And it happened gradually. And then like around the 9th or 10th century, then they started their first empire. They conquered Pagan, which I assume was not Burmese originally. The city of Pagan, which 1,000 years ago was the capital city of Burma. And then their first great king was Anuradha, or Anuruddha, I guess would be the more Indian way of pronouncing it, who at that time, the Burmese were practicing a kind of almost Tibetan kind of Buddhism. So it was sort of like a tantric, like a Vajrayana or something. And there's all these stories about like, there's an ancient chronicle or a medieval chronicle of Burma called the Glass Palace Chronicle. It's called in Burmese, where it says that like if a girl was going to get married, if a woman was going to get married, the night before her wedding, she got sent to the monastery and the monks got first crack at her.
No way.
Yeah,
I know. Yeah, Tibetan Buddhist Vajrayana with the tantric sex. That's the kind of thing they would do, right?
Yeah, I guess so.
So the monks would have sex with this woman before she got married.
Yeah, and they drank alcohol and they practiced martial arts and this kind of stuff. So it wasn't Theravada. Although there have been times in my more rascally moods, I was thinking, man, that would be kind of interesting to be that kind of monk. But
yeah, it's a whole other story. Tibetan Vajrayana tantric sex. That's a whole other video there.
So around the year like 1000, like the 11th century, this king Anuradha, there was a Mon missionary who in Burmese is called Shin Arahan, who came to Pagan and somehow converted King Anuruddha to Theravada Buddhism. And so,
yay!
Yeah, back in those days, when you've got like, it's like essentially totalitarian dictatorships, the king just says, all right, from now on, everyone's going to be a Theravada Buddhist, and then it just sticks.
Yeah.
So there still
could have gone either way, right?
There still was some Maha'ari. That was like the Vajrayana type Buddhism, because there still are some Maha'ari temples that in Pagan, you can tell that, it's got like weird tantric like frescoes and stuff on the walls and the ceilings and that kind of thing. Some of them got censored because it's like naked women and stuff on the temple walls.
Yeah.
So, that was like, okay, Anuruddha, the king, he converts to Theravada Buddhism, or maybe it's just sort of like Constantine in Rome, or just for political reasons, he thinks it would be good for the country if they converted to Theravada. So he just decrees that Theravada is now the state religion. And
I wonder how that came about. Like the next day, the next year, like how do you go about switching all those people to Theravada, bring in monks and teachers? I wonder how they did that.
I don't know, but it was a lot easier in those days because they didn't have, like civil rights or liberalism or anything. You just have a king who, if you don't do what he says, he can just have your head chopped off or whatever.
Yeah. And get things done.
Yeah, and it worked partly just because Theravada Buddhism, for some reason, is just compatible with the Burmese spirit, I think. And also just not only the culture, but also just the environment, like the climate and the geography and everything is similar to like the Ganges Valley anyway. So, you can read the Pali text and it's talking about trees and animals and stuff. And it's, they're there in Burma too. So it's really nice. You can get really close. For me, it was really a blessing to be able to live in Burma because it's almost like living in the Ganges Valley in the Buddhist time.
Probably more so than India today, right?
Yeah, probably, especially like during the military dictatorship when Burma was like shut off with economic sanctions and everything. And it was hard for Westerners to stay there. And, there's no electricity, no running water. And you got guys taking their their team of bullocks out into the field to plow. And the girls still have the big clay water pot balanced on their head to go down to the river or the well to get water for the hut, and, they're all taking a bath outdoors. There's maybe some of the richer people might have like an indoor bathroom, but most people, they just go to the well, they go to the river, and, they've got like a bathing sarong that they wear, and they just take a bath in public. And, there's flashlights and rubber flip-flops and that kind of stuff. So it's not exactly the same, but still it's in a lot of ways. And like the climate is similar. So a monk can just wander around, sleep under trees. It's not like in America where all property is like, it's got rules and regulations and you can't just sleep under a tree. You got to have like a permit to sleep under the damn tree or something,
You're not allowed to sleep in the park and the police will come and get you.
Yeah. Whereas in Burma, there's almost none of that. And there's just ancient ruins and stuff. And you can just sleep in the ancient temple or under the tree or whatever. And a monk can live very similar to the way monks lived in the Buddhist time if he wants to.
That's really fine. That's good.
Yeah. Although for me as a monk, it was difficult just because I was like the weird, obvious foreigner. And so, especially during the military dictatorship, I'm kind of skipping ahead of several centuries, but still, the military government had an eye on me, like secret police always kind of keeping tabs on me. And one time I tried to do like a long walk from Rangoon up towards Mandalay, which was like 400-mile walk. That was going to be my plan.
Wow.
And I could only do it in the wintertime because it's so hot there most of the time. As my ancestors evolved to survive ice ages and it's just too hot. But I made it about 35 miles before I just essentially got arrested. And, they're just asking me all these stupid questions. The military intelligence guys were really not well named because they were not intelligent at all, most of them, or at least just the way they went about things.
I
And
guess
so
they
then,
have maybe a legitimate concern. You could be an American spy disguised as a monk. I mean, it's a
yeah.
reasonable concern.
Or if I just get hit by a truck or something, it could cause like an international incident or
Oh,
something.
so they're
So
concerned about you.
yeah. So as an American, like as a foreigner in Burma, I had more rights and got treated better than a citizen would have.
Really?
Yeah, because I mean, their own citizens, they can. It's sort of like in China. I mean, their own
Yeah.
citizens have essentially zero human rights. The government can do whatever they want. They can just snatch them off the street. And
Yeah, but they're
nobody.
concerned about the reputation with a foreigner, of course.
Yeah. But
Yeah.
with me as an American citizen, it could cause an international incident. You know, so they don't want that. But still, they don't want me walking around. I found out the only way I could really wander around would be to wander around in really remote areas, away from any kind of government offices or anything like that. So that's what I started doing. Just sort of doing my hiking through forests instead of along railroad tracks or highways or anything like that. But okay, getting back to King Anuradha in like the 11th century, he got converted to Theravada, and so he requested. There was in the south was the kingdom of the Muns. It extended into Thailand also, and so King Anuradha requested that this king, what was his name, Manuha, I think, that he send them some monks and some Buddhist scriptures, like copies of the Tipitaka, because the Burmese wanted to convert to Theravada Buddhism, and for some reason the Mun king refused, and so the Burmese just invaded the Mun Empire and conquered it.
Well,
And so
where was that? Is that Thailand today?
The capital, I think, at the time was Satone, which is in southern Burma, in Mun state in southern Burma.
And that was Theravadan?
Yeah, they were Theravada Buddhists.
So this all spilled over, I guess, from India, overland, I guess, right?
Yeah. So in Burma, the first Theravada Buddhists were the Muns. It was like the kingdom of the Muns in the south were Theravada Buddhists before the Burmese, the ethnic Burmese farther north were Theravada Buddhists.
Do you want to go into that history? Like, do they know for sure whether it came by boat from India to Burma or overland from India to Burma?
I think probably it came by boat from like merchants and stuff. That's how it got.
What century do you think it first arrived then?
I don't think they even really know, because it goes beyond recorded history.
Yeah, they probably don't know, because I can never figure that out.
I think the Muns were Theravada Buddhists at least as far back as like 400 AD, possibly way earlier. I mean, the Burmese want to believe that it goes all the way back to the Buddhist time. Like, they've got the story in the Buddhist text. There's a story of the Buddha right after his enlightenment, just a few days after he got enlightened. There were these two traveling merchants, and I can't remember their names, but they ask for some hairs from the Buddha's head as like relics that they can honor, they can take back home and honor. So the Buddha plucks some hairs out of his head, which might have been difficult, because actually the Buddha didn't have like the big thing of hair on top of his head like in the pictures. He shaved his head because he was
just like anyone else, short hairs then, right?
Yeah, but according to the Burmese, then those hairs are in the Shwedagon Pagoda in Rangoon right now, along with a bunch of other relics from previous Buddhas even farther back. But at the time, I think there were Muns in Burma during the Buddhist time, I assume, or proto-Muns or whatever. But
could it be that these two merchants were actually from Burma and they walked back?
That's what the Burmese believe, or they believe that they were Muns, because Rangoon was like a Mun city in ancient times before.
Because the Buddha we know was just in northeastern India, right? He never went that far. But do you think it's possible?
Yeah, well, the Burmese, they've got all these beliefs. They believe that the Buddha actually went to Burma at least once. In fact, there's a town called Minbu, I think it is, which is on the Irrawaddy River. It's on the west bank of the Irrawaddy River. And so the Burmese say he got that far, but he never crossed the Irrawaddy. He never got to the east side of the Irrawaddy River. But of course, as a Westerner, you just think, I mean, why would he even bother? Because it was just like Stone Age, primitive indigenous people living there at the time.
Yeah. Remember when I I lived in Thailand, in Chiang Mai. There was a monastery out in the country called Buddha's Footprint Monastery. It had this story that the Buddha and Ananda, they traveled through the air. They landed there, left a footprint. Now, the Buddha was there in northern Thailand. Of course, I didn't believe that. And the Sri Lankans say that, oh, the Buddha went to Sri Lanka as well. So they all have their story that, no, he went to their country, but I don't believe it.
Most
not
Buddhist
historically. Yeah,
most Buddhist countries want to believe that, it seems like. In fact, you saying that about the footprints, there's a place called Shui Setdo in Burma. It's like supposedly a wildlife refuge, but it's got 2 footprints of the Buddha there. And they're like 4.5 feet long. They're these huge footprints.
Yeah, same in Thailand. They're like 4 feet across, really big things.
Yeah.
Like somebody just put them in there,
Yeah. And people go there and, it's like all covered with gold leaf, and they're like throwing money into the footprints and stuff, and they're worshiping and chanting, and they're really into it. Whereas Westerners, I mean, I think the Buddha was probably, somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 feet tall, maybe a little taller than that. But I mean, taller than a giraffe. I just really can't buy that.
Yeah, it's not historically accurate, not historically believable that the Buddha did that. Like you say, there wasn't a Buddhist civilization there. He wasn't teaching there. He didn't get anything going. I mean,
yeah. Like I lived in a place called Alaundo Kathapa National Park, and Alaundo Kathapa means something like noble corpse of Kassapa, who was like the senior disciple of the Buddha at the time of his death.
Yes, Kassapa.
Yeah, and so the Burmese actually believe that Mahakassapa went to this hill, this place. And he actually stayed in the same cave I was staying in, supposedly, for a short time. But I mean, why in hell would Mahakassapa wander just out to this place that's even remote now? Even nowadays, it's still this remote place out in the middle of nowhere. Why would he bother? But,
and how many miles away is that from where the Buddha lived? 800 miles or 1,000 miles away?
Yeah, it's a long way. I don't know how many miles exactly, but
makes no sense.
It's a hell of a long way.
I mean, we know these monks, they could dematerialize. Kassapa probably couldn't show up there, but why that cave? Why would he do that?
Yeah. What would be the point?
Well, because the Burmese like the story. That's why.
Yeah. Plus, they get these ideas, like mythological, magical kind of ideas that just get mixed in with objective facts. They don't really have a firm grasp on objective facts, except maybe some of the westernized ones. Like scientists and doctors and stuff. But so anyway, getting back to the Pagan, it gets converted to Theravada Buddhism, and by conquering the Muns, it becomes like the first Burmese empire. And Pagan was a big city, and Marco Polo actually went to Pagan and checked it out.
It's like 1300, Marco Polo?
13th century sometime, I'm pretty sure.
1200s, you mean? Okay.
Yeah. And so it was like a glorious city back in those days. And then one of Kublai Khan's generals, I think the Khan or whatever the Mongol Empire of China was called, after Kublai Khan pretty much conquered China. I don't think Genghis Khan conquered all of China, but by Kublai Khan's time, he's like the grandson of Genghis or something. He sent a demand to the Burmese king, demanding tribute. You have to, declare yourself, our suppliant or whatever.
A vassal king.
Yeah, a vassal state. And they refused because, they're very proud and they think, no one's better than us. And so Kublai Khan, he didn't even bother to go himself. He just sent a general and some badass Mongols and just kind of sacked the city of Pagan and set up some puppet kings that were like from Shan state or something.
So what happened to Theravada Buddhism then at that point?
They stayed Theravada Buddhists, but their first empire just pretty much collapsed. And then there were 2 more empires after that. So
it's that previous empire, though, which was Theravada, must have been real glory days for monks. And I wonder what level of attainment they had, and it might have been a great period. But is there much history recorded about the monks of that time or their teachings or any books?
Not really. And like the main chronicle going back for describing early Burmese history is this Glass Palace Chronicle, which has got all kinds of like mythology and stuff mixed in. So actual history, that's like a Western Western invention. Plus, I assume the Chinese had some relatively accurate, like, historical chronicles. But in like a pre-modern civilization, the whole idea of objective, like more or less scientific history, I mean, it's just, they just really didn't have a concept for it. Like with regard to India, I've read that the Indian history was invented by the British. After the British invaded India, then they started trying to understand the actual history of India and working out like a chronology of what happened in what order and all this kind of stuff.
They're saying the Indians and the Burmese, they just didn't think that way. Didn't think in terms of sequential time and record keeping, and they didn't care that much about it.
Yeah, and also that their mind is more like subjective. You know, it's less objective. It's and like when you try to understand reality, even the Buddhist mind is like, you're not looking outwards, you're looking inwards.
Yeah.
And
maybe
so
it's also different with the white race, white people, where we develop science, we're kind of objective. One of our flaws is we're so outward, we're not inward enough. So maybe we have that scientific, objective, materialistic kind of worldview.
Yeah. Both ways have their strong points and their weak points. It's like just about any system that works is going to have good points and bad points. And so in a way, it's really helpful for like a Western person to spend some time in a very non-Western culture just to get some perspective that the Western way of looking at things isn't the only possible way of looking at things. It works really well for some things. I mean, it certainly generates technology and science and all that.
That's true for me. Like I was in Thailand for 4 years. It's really the only time I was out of my culture, you know. Except for living in a Buddhist monastery in England for a while. But yeah, it was a good experience for me. It was almost like my friends would describe it as like another planet. It was so alien to what we grew up with. You know, it was a good experience for me, you know. But I never went back just because of the money mainly. I mean, I would love to go back. I'd love to see Burma as well.
Yeah, Burma is definitely like a different planet in some ways. Or it's just like a throwback like 1,000 years or something.
Yeah.
It's changing fast now because it's been opened up to the West, but when I was living there, it was still pretty much cut off. So we can fast forward. There were like 3 main empires, Burmese empires, and then the third one pretty much fell to the British, where the British they were just expansionist. You know, it's like the British and the French and some other colonialist powers in Europe were just trying to grab as much of the world as they could.
Do you want to go through the empires prior to that, like around 1300 with Marco Polo? Do you want to go 1400, 1500, 1600 till the British arrive?
It's not really necessary, and I don't really know that much about the history of
Burmese
like
Empire.
the second empire especially.
Yeah. Is this like a lineage of family of kings from one family? I mean, is that what you mean by an empire?
The second empire it started off with just some general who rose up and led the Burmese in a successful rebellion against whoever was like the overlord at the time. I can't remember. It was, I can't even remember who they defeated. I think they were Shan, which is, that's one thing about Burma is it's multi-ethnic. You know, the ethnic Burmese mainly live in the center of the country, and then all around the edges, like the frontier areas, you've got like the Shans and the Muns and the Kachins and the Karens and the Chins and the Rakhines, and so all around.
Yeah, I remember in Thailand there was the hill tribes. Like I lived in Chiang Mai, Thailand, right near the Burmese border. So I remember these hill tribes, like the Karens, going back and forth.
Yeah. And so I think it was the Shans that were kind of the nominal kings of Burma for a while after the first empire collapsed. And then there was I can't even remember his name. A lot of the names of these kings and stuff I forget, but just some general or rebel leader, some kind of warlord just was successful in like throwing off the yoke of the foreign kings or whatever and started up the second empire. And usually the empire would get about as big as modern Burma is now, approximately the same size. So it's a relatively big country. Yeah, I think Burma's like maybe not quite as big as the state of Texas. So it's a relatively big country.
That's pretty big, eh?
Yeah, bigger than Thailand.
Yeah, bigger than Thailand.
Yeah. So anyway, the British conquered it, like starting in the 1700s, starting with southern Burma. And at the time when southern Burma was ruled by the British and upper Burma was still ruled by the Burmese, there was like a constant flow of migrants, like economic migrants, coming from Burma into the British part of
Oh, they
Burma.
like the British, better money and jobs with the British.
Yeah, it was just more prosperous. It was more efficiently
Sure.
run. And the
Yeah, of
British, I
course.
mean, they had their faults, but they were effective administrators. They were
Sure,
efficient at administrating the country. And so, yeah, there was like human rights and everything. And so, yeah, there was a lot of them were moving into the British half of Burma, not many going the other way. And then finally, I think I might have told you this before, but mainly just, I think it's probably just for propaganda purposes, just to give like an excuse to the people in England for just conquering the rest of Burma, that the kings of Burma, and let's see, the last king was King Thibaw, I think he was called, and every king had a fortune teller. You know, you have the astrologer, like the royal astrologer, and it was like a tradition in Burma that if the juju got drained out of a certain area, you'd have to move the capital, you know, or else
What's a juju?
just like the magical, the mana or the magical essence or whatever, you know.
Oh,
it's
the
like,
chi energy gets lost, you mean?
yeah, it gets all used up or something, and so
We
then
got to
they have to
move.
They have to move the
Oh.
entire capital, and so that happened several times. And finally, King Thibaw, you know, the country is not doing very well. You know, it's becoming relatively poor, and then his astrologer tells him he's going to have to relocate the entire capital, and he had enough sense to know that he just couldn't afford it. You know, the country just could not afford just pulling up stakes and moving the entire capital and building all new palaces and stuff. He just couldn't afford it. So instead, he was going to compromise and just bury people alive around the outside of the precincts of the current palace as a way of adding new juju to the area. It's like they had this idea, and the Thais had this idea too. If you bury somebody alive, then it causes like a guardian spirit to stay in that area, to like
the ghost of that person, you mean?
Yeah. And like I said, maybe it was even last time, like a person who dies a violent death is more likely to become a powerful spirit than a person who dies of natural causes. And so burying somebody alive is like dying a violent death. Or what the Thais would do, I have read that what the Thais did was they'd even use pregnant women, and then they'd put her down in a hole and then just drop this stone pillar, or maybe just like this big teak log pillar, just kind of squish her. And that's how they plant pillars around like sacred spaces and this kind of stuff. And anyway, news of that somehow leaked out that the king was planning on burying like 40 people or maybe more than 40 people alive.
I just got to say, what would the Buddha say? There's no way Buddhism would approve of this. Sounds like more like a Hindu sacrifice of goats and sacrificing people to the gods or something.
Yeah, well, the Burmese, they never completely got rid of their indigenous, like their Aboriginal belief systems. It's just Buddhism got added onto it. Like even before they were Buddhists, even before they were like Vajrayana Buddhists, they worshiped gnats, which are like devas. They had like this deva cult. It was like polytheism, just worshiping this pantheon of gods. And all of the gods, all of these gnats started off as humans and died violent deaths. So they were like really powerful spirits.
So
it was like
the idea of burying someone and killing them, that they would take rebirth in the ghost realm and be there. It seems to me, why would that person defend the temple? You think they would be pissed off and want to attack them? Like, why? I don't get that logic.
They become like it's in Burmese, it's called an asang, which is like a protective spirit that's like anchored to a certain area and just, you know, guards it.
What does it do? Well, maybe could there be some truth to that, I wonder.
Maybe. I've lived in places that had asangs, or I was warned that there were asangs. And, you know, it's like different ones. You've got these different taboos. You're not allowed to spit on the ground, or you're not allowed to like pee here, you know, on the ground, or this kind of stuff.
But if you do the right thing, would it protect you? Did it serve some helpful purpose?
I think mainly what the way it would work would just be like the confidence you get from like the placebo effect. Your belief that it works causes it to have some value, maybe.
But you know, I really believe in the cosmology, maybe more than you do. So I'm thinking, well, how would it actually work if they do take rebirth in the ghost? Or maybe if they're really virtuous people that could take rebirth as a deva, maybe that they would take virtuous people and kill them, and they want the deva and the trauma. It's kind of hard to figure this out.
Yeah, I don't think that it really is in accordance with Theravada Buddhism. Obviously, killing somebody is against Theravada Buddhism, and the idea of somebody becoming like an assant or like a powerful spirit from dying a violent death. I can't remember ever seeing that in any Buddhist text. So it could just be
everyone has different karma, right? Someone would just go on to another human birth or go on. They wouldn't. There's no reason why they would be stuck there logically from a Theravadan view.
Yeah, it's just a continuation of the Nat cult, where they were worshiping these spirits that were people who died violent deaths and became these powerful spirits. And then I think it was Anurata who converted the country to Theravada. He just incorporated Saka, king of gods, into the Nat cult as the king of the Nats.
Oh, so he's my favorite deva, Saka, king of the gods, tower tips of heaven.
And in Burma nowadays, still you can see Nat shrines. I mean, it's not as common as Buddhist temples or anything, but every once in a while, like in Thailand also, like you got a big tree and there'll be like this little altar on the side of the tree, and people, maybe a little statue there.
I've seen that.
Yeah, people will make offerings. They'll offer flowers or burn incense or something.
That's like a Bhumi Deva. Like we have Bhumi Devas that live in trees, according to the Theravada.
Yeah, that would be a Ruka Deva. If it lives in a tree, it'd be in Burmese it's called Yokazo. A tree deva.
Is that different than a Nat? A Nat is a deva living in a tree?
Technically, a Nat would be a deva, especially like kind of a lower level deva. You know, like the Tawatimso level or below could qualify as a Nat, I think.
But this is someone had a violent death, you mean, the Nat specifically?
In the Nat cult, all of the ones in the official list of the Nats that were worshipped in the official Nat cult, all of them were human beings who died a sudden, unnatural death. Yeah.
This is fascinating stuff to me. Okay, so we can carry on with the kings.
So that's like the Burmese culture is, it's originally based on that, and then it has like Buddhism on top of that. Yeah. And then Theravada got added later than that, but the Burmese are really into Theravada, though. I mean, they're very devout, very very dogmatic. They just, it's like a medieval approach to religion. It's sort of like,
I'm a bit that way myself.
Yeah, it's sort of like Europe, like in like the year 1500 or something, where the people just have absolute unquestioning faith in their religion, and there really are some saintly old monks and nuns walking around. The people, I mean, their culture heroes tend to be, monks, really.
Rather than Hollywood movie stars.
Has a reputation for great wisdom. Like you get in a taxi cab in Rangoon, a lot of the time, you'll see that he's got his dashboard turned into like a little altar, and he's got his favorite monk, like a picture of him like taped to the dashboard, and like maybe a little flower or something offered to him just to keep him from getting in car wrecks or something.
It's better than some slutty Hollywood star.
It's like the culture heroes in the West are mostly like entertainers with the morals of alley cats, plus maybe some athletes. The athletes, at least, they're in training, so they have to be a little bit moral.
Yeah. So I think what you're going to say next is the British are pissed off about this king intending to kill a bunch of people for Nats.
They use that as like propaganda back in England as a justification for just conquering the whole rest of Burma, because they're like, look, the king is just this, this violent, bloodthirsty barbarian. Mainly they had like economic reasons and all this. I mean, the real reasons, not the reasons they feed to the people in the newspapers, but the real reasons is they want the teak forests and that kind of. And
same as today. Nothing's changed today. They still give us
They want the teak forests and the ironwood forests and the ruby mines and the jade mines and all that, because Burma has like the highest quality natural rubies in the world and lots of jade and like some of the largest teak forests left on the planet. And so, that's mainly what they wanted, I'm pretty sure. And so like in the mid to late 1800s. I don't know the exact word, the exact year. The British conquered Upper Burma too, and there was like a war, but I mean the Burmese just they didn't win a single battle. I'm pretty sure.
So that's quite late. The late 1800s they did that.
Yeah, it was like maybe 1870 or thereabouts, plus or minus 10 years. Yeah. So yeah, it was relatively late.
Yeah, just 150 years ago.
Yeah, and Burma was the wealthiest, most prosperous country in Southeast Asia under the British. But the way it works is you're going to have angry young men who are just going to be dissatisfied with the way things are, and they're going to be wanting freedom and liberation and all this kind of stuff, just all over the world. Wherever you have like colonialism, you're going to have mostly these angry young guys, like college students and stuff, that are going to protest. You know, they know better than, you know, they can run things better than the colonialists and all that. And all over the world, you know, you even before World War II, there's all these movements for greater independence and autonomy and more rights and all this kind of stuff.
You know, I'm thinking about Mahatma Gandhi kicking the British out. That was like 1948, 47.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, in India.
Yeah. So it must be an influence, Burma and India right next door.
Well, for a while, Burma was just called Further India. It was all part of the British Raj. It was all, at the beginning, it was under the same administration.
Yeah, it was all the same thing to them, to the British, right?
But then one of the reforms they did was granting like autonomous status to Burma so that it wasn't part of India. It wasn't called British Further India anymore. So, yeah. And then it was just, you know, all over the world because of like creeping liberalism, and colonialism was just going out of fashion. It was becoming politically incorrect. You know, women got
with World War II,
like to vote in the early 20th century. And that caused like this, you know, the opening of the floodgates for like, you know, compassionate liberalism, bleeding heart liberalism, so to speak.
I think also with World War II, I think there's American pressure on Churchill and the British to, you know, give up your colonies. Let them be. There's more of a trend, a fashion for independence for the colonies.
Yeah, to some degree that, yeah, obviously America was pressuring not just the UK, but, you know, pretty much any colonialist power to just liquidate, because it was just it was just obsolete, really, just culturally. It just was becoming more and more of an embarrassment.
I look at it from the globalist perspective too. The globalists probably have their own motives of taking control of all these countries by breaking up these big empires so the globalists could control it through the Rothschilds. That's just the way I would think without even researching it, before even looking at it. Just that's the way I would kind of interpret it.
Well, there's lots and lots of forces, lots and lots of factors involved. So yeah, but part of it is just creeping liberalism and like the you know, Enlightenment ideals of self-determination and autonomy and equality and human rights and all this was already, even before World War II, was making colonialism less and less popular, and just kind of it was just going out of style even before World War II.
Yeah, it's going out of style. Yeah. So Burma got its independence, what, 1948?
Yeah, it was one of the first countries to get independence from the British. Yeah. And the way it worked was, in World War II, you had a group of, I think they were called the 30 Comrades, who actually went to Imperial Japan to learn like guerrilla warfare tactics to help the Japanese kick the British out of Burma, because they saw the Japanese as like liberators and allies.
Oh, the Burmese did.
Yeah, so you had like General Aung San, who's like considered like the father of modern Burma. Like,
yeah,
he was one of these comrades who went to Japan to learn like guerrilla warfare techniques and just sort of leadership techniques. And
I didn't realize. So he was anti-British, pro-Japanese.
Yeah, at first he saw the British. You know, he's like one of these angry young men who just see the colonialist oppressor as the enemy. You know, if only they could get their foot off of our necks, then we would just skyrocket heavenwards in glorious prosperity and all this bullshit. Which
like Zimbabwe from Rhodesia, kicked the whites out, and now we have Zimbabwe free.
Well, all of the countries in sub-Saharan Africa, it's all the same, or pretty much all the same. So anyway, it worked, and the British were pretty much driven out of Burma during World War II, and the Japanese came in, and then the Burmese realized that the Japanese were worse than the British, because the British, I mean, they were siphoning off a lot of wealth and just shipping it back to England and all that, but still they had a concept of decency, and they did try to be fair to some degree. They
didn't rape the women, I guess, as much, that kind of thing.
Based upon what I've read, that they didn't really need to rape the women, because there are always going to be women who are willing to bed down with high status white guys.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, it's still pretty much that way, I think.
That's what happened to me in 1993. I went to Thailand, and some Thai woman got me, and I got married.
Yeah, it's notoriously easy for a white guy to get himself a brown girl.
Yeah, I did think what happened to me. I thought I knew better, but I made that mistake.
Yeah, you didn't know better.
I knew better, but that's another story.
Yeah. So anyway, getting back to General Aung San, he switched sides and started helping the British and the Americans to retake Burma, just kind of on the condition that Burma gets independence afterwards. And there was a lot.
Sounds like an opportunist then, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, most politicians are, I think. A lot of them
are. Alan Clements, he's a well-known American, spent a lot of time in Burma. He described the generals like the George Washington of Burma, really revered.
Yeah, he is revered, definitely. He's seen as like the founder of modern independent Burma. But what happened was, at the end of World War II, Burma was just in smoking ruins. It had been like almost all of its industry had been bombed. Its economy was just, pretty much wiped out.
I didn't know it was that bad. So this is the British and Americans fighting the Japanese. They were
first the Japanese fighting their way in and driving out the Allies, and then the Allies later on just doing like a counteroffensive and driving the Japanese back out again. So it was like a lot of fighting going on in Burma. It was really nasty.
Can you tell us about the bombing? Like what kind of planes? Was American and British planes? You mentioned these Tiger bombs.
I'm not sure what kind of bombers or anything, but there was like a famous one, Bodhi Pagoda in Rangoon took a direct hit from a bomb. And well, in a way, it was kind of interesting, because then they were able to dig down into the center of it, and they found this really ancient, maybe even pre-Buddhist. It's like this kind of weird-looking blob, like maybe it's like an asteroid rock or something.
Really?
It was like the original center of worship.
Woo! Wow.
Yeah. So anyway, the British government offered the Burmese to help rebuild their economy before granting them independence. But General Aung San, he was like a national hero at the time, and he wanted to be the first president of independent Burma. And so he rejected all offers to help rebuild the economy, because he wanted independence now so that he would win the election and become the first president. Or this is what I've read anyway. So that's what he wanted. He turned down all these offers from the British to help rebuild the economy before they got their independence.
So you think he made a mistake with that?
Oh yeah, certainly. And it was even worse of a mistake, because almost as soon as they got independence, Bojo Aung San, or General Aung San, and almost his entire cabinet were murdered.
Yeah, I know the assassination is terrible.
Yeah. Somebody comes in with like an automatic rifle and just mows down like their first cabinet meeting, So
you want to describe how that happened? It was like a military band, like with a whole convoy came in, right? I guess they weren't well defended in the capital. They're in Parliament.
I think it was just one guy with like a machine gun. Just came in.
One guy.
I'm pretty sure.
Wow.
And
But
even
what was
today,
this conspiracy behind that, the politics? What was the motive? Do you know anything about that?
well, even today, it's still kind of controversial because a lot of people think that U Nu was in on it, or Ne Win was in on it, where it was just power politics, where one faction is trying to wipe out the other faction so that they can take power instead of the other guy.
Well, who were the other guys, and who became prime minister after he was assassinated?
His name was U Nu. He was the first prime minister or president or whatever it was, the first leader of independent Burma, because Aung San was killed off immediately, with the country in pretty much still in smoking ruins because they turned down all the offers to have their economy.
So how long was he president or prime minister for? Just a few months?
U Nu or
U Song? He's the father of the current leader, right? U Song Chi.
Yeah, he's the father of Aung San Suu Kyi.
Yeah.
So she just throws in her father's name, Aung San, at the beginning of her name. Her name is actually just Suu Kyi, but she wants, the prestige of her father, the founder of the country, in her name. So
her he was prime minister for just such a short time. Do you know how long?
Yeah. No, it was a very short time, almost immediately. But he's revered not because of what he did as prime minister or president, because he didn't really accomplish anything other than just like negotiating the independence, fighting for the independence, that kind of stuff. So that's what he's really revered for, is, he set up independence for Burma, even though he didn't lead the country after he got independence because he was dead.
So the suspicion is the next prime minister was in on the assassination.
There are some people who think that, or that Ne Win, who I'll get to, was in on it. Sort of like the Kennedy assassination, where a lot of people think Nixon was involved in it and Johnson was involved in it, this kind of stuff.
Well, they both were. We know, definitely proven Johnson was involved to assassinate. The vice president became president because it's one of the most disturbing things in American history.
Yeah, there's a lot more information on that kind of stuff in America, whereas the records in Burma are few or non-existent. So that they'll never really know, maybe.
Well, what do you think? Who do you think was behind it?
I don't know. I don't have enough information even to make an educated guess. But
and you were there for 20 years, and people talk, right? And
so you hear these conspiracy theories about U Nu was in on it, or this person was in on it. But who knows? I mean, especially you live in Burma, that just these wild stories get circulating, and they might have zero actual fact backing them up. So. I
know stories from Thailand. When I live in Thailand, I know stories of the politics there that I wouldn't repeat in Thailand, or I could go to jail.
Yeah. So U Nu became like the first more or less functional prime minister of Burma. I assume they're called prime minister. Let's just go with the word prime minister. And it's a parliamentary kind of government. So I assume it's prime minister. And he was like really a devout Buddhist and very superstitious, and so a lot of his agenda was just like appeasing the Nat cult and this kind of weird superstitious stuff. Like he started planting lots and lots of coconut plantations, and ostensibly, like, the official reason was to promote the use of coconut oil or something, but his secret reason was that one of the Nats in the Nat cult, which is Min Mahagiri, he likes coconuts. So in order to appease the Min Mahagiri Nat, he's got the whole country planting coconut plantations. And
this is not Theravada Buddhism, though. He was suspicious, but that's not Buddhism.
This is just kind of goofy, superstitious stuff.
Yeah. Oh, gosh.
Yeah. And he was a devout Buddhist too. So he was like a scholar, like a Buddhist scholar, but he was incompetent as like a leader, as a politician. And so another thing about Burma is, I've already mentioned that there's lots of different ethnicities. You got the Burmese in the middle mostly, and then you've got the different ethnic groups around the edges. And one of the ways that the British kind of kept Burma under control was sort of keeping them kind of independent of each other so that they wouldn't gang up, they wouldn't unify, sort of divide and conquer kind of a thing. And so at the end of World War II and after Burma got independence, you've got all these ethnic groups that General Aung San had even promised them, after we get independence, you can be independent if you want. And then they just changed their mind. It was just sort of like an empty promise, just a way of getting them to go along.
Sounds like a politician.
Yeah. And so you had all these different ethnic groups that were sort of rising up in rebellion. And then also in China, when the Kuomintang, like Chiang Kai-shek's faction in China, lost control. You had them moving into northern Burma and sort of setting up guerrilla stations there. And so,
I didn't know that, because I know they went to Taiwan. I never thought of them going to Burma, which would make sense.
Yeah, a lot of them did. And so you had this, Burma was like almost immediately just started degenerating into civil war. Like all these different ethnic groups are rising up in rebellion, all these insurgent groups. And U Nu was just incompetent to deal with it. So once he requested the leader of the Burmese armies, General Ne Win, who was another one of these the comrades that went to Japan during World War II.
So you're going from 1948 to 1962 here, right? What's the progression in that time? Like, how long was he prime minister for?
He was prime minister like from 1948 to like 1962. But before then, he actually asked the General Ne Win to step in and get things under control, because the country was just collapsing into civil war.
Well, how did he get reelected for those 1948, 19? If he's so incompetent, why didn't they vote him out and get somebody else in?
I have no idea. Maybe it was just he was such a good Buddhist, such a devout Buddhist that people liked him or something. I don't know.
Unless it's rigged voting. I don't know if we can trust him.
Or that too.
Who knows?
So anyway, the first time Ne Win, he gets things pretty much under control. He reestablishes some order, and then he voluntarily hands control back to U Nu again, to the parliamentary government. So they were under martial law, I guess, for a while, and then U Nu handed it back. And even some of the older Burmese people that can remember those times that I've talked to, they admit that things did get better when the military stepped in. And then the second time, it was just obviously U Nu was just could not keep things under control. The civil war is starting to rage again. You had all these insurgent groups, so that the General Ne Win stepped in again and just took over, and that was the beginning of the military dictatorship in Burma.
So he was asked to step in again?
I don't think he was asked the second time. I think he just went ahead and did it.
See, this gives me a much better impression of him. I just thought the military just took over in 1962. I didn't realize why. So now it seems a bit more justified the way you're explaining it.
Yeah, and like I said, the older Burmese people who remember, actually, they admit that things did get better at first. Things got worse again afterwards, but at first there was an improvement when the military took over, because the Burmese in general, they're not really good at organization, which is something that I'm butting heads with all the time.
Yeah, we talked about that before.
Shower today just because they can't get the gas turned back on.
I know the Thais are a similar way in Thailand. I know Europeans working in Thailand saying they don't care at all. They don't care at all. The Thais are
that's just another difference of Western civilization and Western culture. I mean,
work ethic.
Objective and organized, and want things done right, and just work, carefully work out, the best way of doing something. Whereas like watching like Burmese village guys working on a project, it doesn't matter what the project, they're building a rock wall or something. It's sort of like ants, where you see ants, they find a grasshopper leg, and it's like one of them starts pulling on it, and then he's not strong enough, and then gradually more ants find the same grasshopper leg, and then they all kind of work together and pull it back towards the nest. But they're not organizing at all. They just kind of have the same general idea of I find good food, I'm pulling it to the nest, kind of a thing. And just because the similarity of the way they think, it works as, it works usually because they're all kind of working in the same direction. So that's kind of the way it works. It's not their organization is often just rudimentary. Like,
so they're not planning, really thoroughly planning. They just sort of just go at it. You mean?
Yeah. They don't have a well worked out idea of what they're going to do. It's just that they just kind of work in that direction, kind of vaguely and without. Yeah, well, lots of yelling and stuff, and they'll trash like everything in a 10-foot radius around what they're fixing, you know. But yeah, it's like I've told you before about going for alms. Like, I was relatively famous, so sometimes I'd get to the village and there'd be a line of like 100 people all wanting to offer food.
Yeah.
And if I don't say anything, I mean, they're going to be offering like a big handful of rice, you know, each person, and it just doesn't occur to them that 100 people can't each put in 10% of a bowlful.
Yeah.
It just does not register. It never registers.
They're not logical and rational.
Yeah, and so even though I was, you know, technically the mendicant, like the religious beggar or whatever, I'm having to like take charge and tell them, you know, you got to line up, and each person gets to put in 1 spoonful each. And I'm like having to enforce discipline on this whole group of people, because otherwise it's just not going to happen. It's just going to turn into a free-for-all and a fiasco. And my bowl will be overflowing before I'm 20% of the way down the line.
They're going to fight with each other and compete to give you food for the merit, right? They want the merit.
Yeah, they want the merit. And it just doesn't occur to them. You know, you tell them, I mean, that's just too much. It's not going to work. And it's like, oh, it's just a little bit. But, you know, they don't think that, you know, 10 little bits are going to fill the whole bowl, and there's 100 people or 80 people waiting to offer food. So yeah, it's just really, like I've told people, like if people were going to come visit me in Burma, like with some Western person, like my brother or something, I just warn them, you know, the most important quality to have if you know, for a Westerner to come to Burma is patience.
Yeah.
You just have to accept that things aren't going to work right. You know, it's like the bus isn't going to run on schedule. The bus is going to be late. The air conditioning might not work. The electricity will go on and off at random. You know, that's just the way it is. And you have to just put up with it, because if you don't accept it, you're just going to be in this chronic state of being frustrated and pissed off all the time, like my brother was. So you just have to accept it.
So your brother came to visit you?
Yeah, he did.
Good brother.
Yeah, I guess so.
My sisters visited me, but my brothers didn't visit me in the 1990s.
Yeah. So I guess we're up to the military dictatorship now. And it was, I mean, when I was there, they were brutal and incompetent. It was sort of like a mafia style of government. You know, they were really incompetent and just brutal. There was like no human rights. Like, for example, back when, what was his name? Kim Yun. He was like the military dictator at the time. His name was Kim Yun. And in one of the government-run newspapers, because back then all the media was run by the government.
So you were there in the early 1990s, right?
Yeah, from the early 1990s to 2011. And then I went back a couple times after that, spent a few more years there. But in the newspaper, they had a picture of Kim Yun, who was the military dictator. And then right next to it, with regard to a different article, there was the headline, "The World's Greatest Liars." But because Kim Yun's picture just happened to be accidentally next to this headline saying "The World's Greatest Liars," it was like some god-awful number of people. It was like 20 people that worked at the newspaper were like tortured to death, or so I was told.
Really tortured to death?
Yeah, it was awful. So, or you just wind up in a prison, and you're eating like watery pumpkin soup for, you know, every day until you eventually just starve to death or die of malnutrition or something. So it's awful. I knew a guy who just got pretty much snatched off the street because he was a leader of like the democracy movement, the National League for Democracy. He was involved in that. And then this was like in the late 90s, I guess, where the National League for Democracy publicized that they were going to have a meeting. And so the army government responded by just arresting all the members there, or all of the main, you know, the most important members. It was like at least 100 people that got arrested. And I never saw him again. That was just it. He was gone. And if they can't get you, they'll get your family.
What do you think happened to those 100 people?
Just wind up in a prison or a prison camp or something, and who knows what happens after that.
Think they may have survived and might be alive today?
I hope so. It'd be nice. I just never heard from them again after that.
Wow. So if they can't get you, they get your family. What do they do?
Well, they'll just, arrest them or, confiscate all their property or torture them or shoot them or whatever.
Oh, you mean if you escape, if they want someone to escape,
Yeah,
they'll just
if
get
you
the
run
family.
off, if you run off and hide somewhere, then they'll just come after your nearest relatives that they can locate.
So that gives you people a motive to surrender. That's the idea.
Yeah,
To protect
yeah.
your family, you have to surrender.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
so they're really brutal. I remember reading Solzhenitsyn's The Gulag Archipelago when I was in Burma, and it made me happy because, it's like the KGB was bad, but they were really efficient at being bad, whereas the Burmese government was bad, but they were just incompetent at being bad.
Yeah, you're right.
So, like, even though it's a brutal military dictatorship, for the most part, the government only exists in like the military bases in the towns. Because out in the villages, it's pretty much just Buddhist culture, like traditional Burmese culture that's running the society. So you've got like a village headman, and he'll, if there's something that needs to be done, he might, call up like a posse of young guys. Somebody needs to be caught. There's a burglar or something, that kind of thing. And it's really peaceful for the most part. I mean, the people hated and feared the government.
Yeah.
But
would the headman have a relationship with the government, with the military?
Yeah, a lot of the time, yeah. As a general,
take orders from them.
He had to be approved, but
Yeah.
nevertheless, there was the government was so inefficient that there was just, most laws were unenforced. Almost the only thing you would really get in trouble for would be to threaten the authority or to like defy the authority of the government. If you were like in any way threatening the government, then you could get in trouble.
Yeah.
But otherwise, you could pretty much do anything you wanted to. And then if you had money, then you really you didn't pay for a lawyer, you just pay for the judge, and so the rich people could pretty much get away with anything too. And in the villages, pretty much everyone was poor. And so, they were all kind of equals. It was sort of almost like a family mentality. It's a very community oriented people. Like, somebody's house burns down, the neighbors will all just pitch in and build them a new house.
Well, that's good, eh? Good sense of community. Yeah.
Yeah.
And happy people, you're saying, they're quite happy people.
I wouldn't say that they're happy. It's just that they are less unhappy.
Okay.
Yeah, because I think the way I look at it is happy and unhappy are like two sides of the same coin. If you've got a lot of positive, you're going to have a lot of negative to balance it out, But the Burmese, they've got maybe less actual pleasure. They have less fun, Their idea of a good time is, you're at the tea shop smoking cigars and drinking tea and talking to your buddy. That's like a good time for them. And, so they don't have as much fun as Westerners do. They don't experience as much pleasure as Westerners do. The girl, I mean, you pretty much have to marry a girl in order to kiss her out in the villages. They're very traditional and
really
very conservative. Yeah.
Wow.
So
remember, he says, as long as their kids are healthy and have enough food, they're okay. They're pretty content people.
Yeah. I mean, anybody's going to be unhappy when their baby is sick or the crops are dying or something like that. But still, the problems that they have are very simple, natural kind of problems. Whereas in the West, people, everything's so complicated and so superficial, and you got some guy just melting down because his steak is overdone, or he didn't get the right kind of dressing on his salad or something. He goes to
or maybe the transgender offended by a pronoun that was used.
that kind of crap. Whereas in Burma, it's they have suffering like everybody else. The First Noble Truth applies everywhere, but it's just simpler, cleaner, more wholesome kind of problems as a general rule. And like you building a house, I mean, they're more free in a lot of ways. Burma traditionally has been more free than like America. or at least nowadays. Like, you want to build a house in America, I mean, it's got to be according to this building code, and you have to have like electrical outlets every so many feet, and you got to have the studs 16 inches or however much it is, and it has to be all according to this code. You got to have inspectors coming, you got to have all these permits and everything. Whereas in Burma, you want to build a house, you just build it. That's it.
Yeah, I know in California, our branch monastery, Bayagiri, they were writing about you couldn't just build a kuti for a monk because it has to have a washroom and a toilet. And then you have to have all this plumbing. It's hugely expensive, They couldn't just have a regular kuti where you go somewhere else for the washroom, but they would have to have a washroom there because of the building code. So it's very expensive. They were talking about this.
Yeah, to live like a monk in America is practically illegal. Like, to live in a hut is against the law. It's literally against the law to live in a hut in America. Except for the street people in like San Francisco, they can do anything they want. But like a law-abiding citizen, I mean, then that's not an option. It's just weird the way things have gotten in America, just mainly because of the left going insane.
Yeah, so the Duke is everywhere. The Duke is east and west.
Yeah, I suppose. So maybe now I could get away with living in a hut so long as it's like in a homeless camp or something. I don't know.
So this is interesting. So the military dictatorship. So this went on 1962 to about 2011. That's about 50 years?
Yeah, something thereabouts.
Wow. Was it pretty consistent, the military, or did it get worse and better, or is it pretty about the same?
They experimented with socialism for a while. They had like the Burmese road to socialism, which was just a fiasco.
Oh.
Socialism in general is a fiasco, and it was no exception in Burma. The Burmese attempt at it was no more successful than any other attempt at socialism.
You don't mean communism, though, do you? What do you mean by their socialism?
Socialism, just nationalizing businesses and industry and all that, and then it's sort of like these corrupt generals that pretty much own and run everything. So yeah, it was socialism with the standard like cronyism, and it's like even now I think there are like seven ultra rich Burmese guys that pretty much own most of the country.
Oh,
and they've even got laws worked out so that like Westerners, I've heard about this, like a Westerner wants to build a structure in like Rakhine State, but according to the law, he has to buy all of the materials from one of these approved businesses, which are owned by these seven super rich guys.
Those guys are generals or generals' families?
Not necessarily. They're either generals or more likely they're like the nephew of a general, and then the general gets kickbacks or that kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, there's a lot of nepotism going on. They're very family oriented too, so there's a lot of that. Yeah.
Oh, I see.
But so in a way, it was kind of a blessing though that the government was so incompetent. Because, it's like the Bible says you cannot serve both God and mammon, and the Burmese just didn't have no mammon to serve because it's like there's no economy. Their national economy was practically non-existent.
Yeah, I think of my experience in Thailand, like the Thais seemed materialistic, even before the American influence of the Vietnam War. I think the Thais are kind of materialistic people, and of course, their economy is much more successful than the Burmese, so it seemed Buddhism was weaker in Thailand than in Burma.
Yeah, to some degree. It's like Burma and Thailand were like traditional arch enemies for a long time. It's sort of like England and France in the West, or maybe like Sparta and Athens in ancient Greece. They're like the traditional enemies of each other. And the Thais were like the sensualists, they were like the sophisticated the sophisticated pleasure seeker type, the more artistic and all this. Whereas the Burmese were the more Spartan, kind of rough, simplistic, just stoic kind of existence. And usually it's the Stoics that win, or the Spartans that win over the Athenians. Like the Peloponnesian War, it was the Spartans eventually beat the Athenians, and the Burmese were generally won against the Thais.
Yeah, I remember that when my Thai wife, when I was married to Pia, she was still upset about the Burmese that came and sacked the capital of Yuta in the mid 1700s. She was really upset about the Burmese. I said, Pia, that was like 2.5 centuries ago. Relax, but she was still bothered her. She had a real grudge against the Burmese.
Yeah,
She was part Burmese. Like she looked very much Burmese herself.
Yeah, well, it was a pretty shitty thing. It was completely unprovoked from what I have read. It was like just sudden attack, unprovoked attack, and yeah, I think Thailand never fully recovered from that. At least Buddhism in Thailand,
Yeah,
because they sacked the capital city of Ayutthaya.
Yeah, I went there. I saw the ruins, beautiful ruins of that.
And that was like the center of the Buddhist ecclesiastical hierarchy in Thailand. That's where like the Buddhist universities and stuff were. And so when that just got sacked, it pretty much just collapsed the whole ecclesiastical structure for a while, or at least it maybe not collapsed the whole thing, but it was such a devastating blow to just the ecclesiastical structure of Thai Buddhism that it never really fully recovered. And to this day, the Thai monks, they're stricter in their Vinaya practice, and they do more Dhutanga, but their meditation and their scholarship is pretty much inferior to like Burmese meditation and scholarship.
That's really bad karma for the Burmese to do that. I should point out, though, in Theravada Buddhism, we've never had a religious war. I guess this is a Burmese king attacking a Thai king, but that's not a religious war. It wasn't a religious motive. Like, the Christians have their religious wars, but Buddhism, we don't actually have religious wars, wouldn't you say?
Yeah. I mean, religion has been used as a kind of unifying factor, like especially in Sri Lanka, like during the Middle Ages up into modern times, where you've got the Buddhist Sinhalese against the Hindu Tamils. It was sort of a religious divide there. The Tamils were mostly Shaivite Hindus, and the Sri Lankans or the Sinhalese were mostly Theravada Buddhists. So kings could use Buddhism as kind of a rallying cry. You'd have like Buddhist flags and stuff, waved in the army and all that kind of stuff. But it was mainly just trying to drive out invaders, or at least trying to maintain their own position with invaders kind of living on their borders.
Yeah, that's fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, so that kind of stuff. I mean, like even now in the Burmese, like the 969 movement, you got a lot of monks that are really opposed to Islam spreading in Burma, and they want as little Islam in Burma as possible, which I gotta admit is understandable.
We did a video on that. We did a video a long time ago about that, but you could talk a bit about that situation. It seems justifiable that they don't want Islam taking over the country.
Yeah, it's understandable, but in a way that's also has a lot of religious, Buddhist undertones to it. They use Buddhism as kind of a way of unifying the culture, unifying the people. It's kind of like a Burmese nationalism has a lot of Buddhism in it, because the Burmese, unlike a lot of the ethnic groups, are just really devout Buddhists.
Yeah, well, that's understandable.
A lot of the ethnic groups are Christians, because during British times, you had missionaries going off, and back in very early times, like the Nagas, they were like headhunters up in northwestern Burma, and then they got converted over to, I don't know what it is, baptism or Jehovah's Witnessism or something. I don't know, some kind of Christianity.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah.
So currently today, they're still trying to push out the Muslims and push them into, I guess, Bangladesh.
They already got pushed out. Now it's like the globalists and the NGOs are trying to get the Rohingyas to come back in again.
That's not good. Yeah. They just want to cause conflict. Of course, the globalists want to cause conflict.
Predictable. Yeah, it was like this. The problem was pretty much solved once the Rohingyas were driven out. But then, of course, the NGOs, the bleeding heart liberals and all that they're demanding that the Rohingyas come back.
Yeah, I see YouTube videos for that, So what's the current status? Are the Burmese losing, or are they winning this?
I think the government kind of has knuckled under to some degree, just for like diplomatic reasons, and are allowing a certain number to come back and to be granted Burmese citizenship, because I don't think they were ever really considered to be actual citizens. They were imported by the British colonialists like during the 1800s to be like rice farmers in newly cleared areas that the British had opened up. Like the British, when they came to southern Burma, the whole Irrawaddy Delta was just jungle, and they just cleared that, and it's like some of the most fertile rice fields in the country, because deltas are, it's like alluvial soil.
Yeah. So you're saying it was the British that bought the Muslims, and the Burmese didn't do this?
Yeah, and also the British were bringing in a lot of Indians as administrators, because they didn't really trust the Burmese as like office workers and stuff. They weren't organized enough. They didn't think in a systematic way, and so they were bringing lots and lots of Indians, like doctors and engineers and stuff, and a lot of those were Muslims too. So there's Muslims scattered around Burma, and also in like the southern parts of Burma, I think just through just like trade routes and stuff with Muslims, like all of Malaysia farther south is Muslim now. Indonesia's Muslim now, so some of that happened too, like in the southern parts of Burma.
I see. Okay. So do you want to comment on democracy of the last 10 years? How's it going? Like, is it a real democracy, or is it more businesses, Westerners coming in, building McDonald's and stuff like that, Kentucky Fried Chicken? Do you know what's going on now?
Well, before 2011, it was like the whole global community is like got international sanctions against Burma, which, as I said, was in some ways, it was like a mixed blessing, because it made the country much more Buddhist, and because they didn't have all this worldliness to chase after. And then finally, just to get some like loans from the World Bank and all this kind of stuff, they made some relatively superficial changes. It's kind of like what Indonesia did when they moved away from a military government, where mainly what happens is the military still has X number of cabinet posts, I think, and also they get like I don't remember the percentage of parliament, but it's still pretty much heavily run by the military, and mainly the generals just took off their uniforms and put on civilian clothing, and they're still doing a lot of the same stuff, but it was enough of a change towards democracy and like liberal government that the international community got rid of most of the sanctions, and they started getting like World Bank handouts and this kind of stuff. But then because of the Rohingya thing, now they're like wanting to make sanctions against them again, which might be a good thing.
I have a Burmese friend. He said that Burma was like the kitchen for the Chinese, a food source. So I thought maybe the Americans are afraid that they're too aligned with China, so they want to get them more on their side. So they made these breaks
for that too, because the Chinese are just buying up Burma right now.
Oh,
yeah.
So is it better for businesses? Like, are the people a bit more prosperous now under democracy, like making more money, more prosperous?
Yeah, and now finally there's like electricity getting to the villages, and people have cell phones and stuff, and maybe they'll even get running water someday.
Oh, that would be good. Okay, yeah. So and U C Chong, or U C, is she still the president or prime minister, a nominal leader?
I don't think she ever was. I really don't know what's going on in
well, she's very influential, now. I think, in the election, right?
Yeah. I assume she's still the leader of the National League for Democracy.
Yeah.
But I remember, this is just another example of how the Burmese government used to work, that for a few years, the military government was forcing people to plant castor bean plants. Like you make castor oil out of. I guess it's called castor bean plant. I don't know what it is. But in Burmese, it's called chetsu bin. It's called chetsu. And actually what it was, officially the reason for making people plant millions of these castor oil plants all over the country was so that the government could use castor oil. They're gonna have more of their economy based on producing castor oil or something. But the actual reason was Burmese word magic. The Burmese are really into word magic. And so the name of the castor oil plant is Chetsu, which starts with the same letters as Suu Kyi, but it's reversed. So it neutralizes her power to have these plants all over the country. It's like word magic.
This is nuts. So this is the generals want to neutralize her power?
Yeah, probably the generals being guided by like Burmese fortune tellers.
Yeah, because I guess they always competed with her, but they never executed her for some reason. They kept her in house imprisonment for a long time.
Yeah, they should have just kicked her out.
I guess
she should have just gone, because she could have been talking over Radio Free Asia every night if she wanted to, instead of just staying in her house meditating and playing the piano.
Yeah, but still, she managed to become the leader, though. I mean, she waited it out, became the leader.
Sort of. Although, really, I think Rambo did more to help Burma than Suu Kyi ever did.
You don't think she's a good leader? I don't know. What has she done?
Well, she's unpopular with the West now because she's taken the side of the Burmese Buddhists against the Rohingyas.
But that's a good thing, though, really.
Yeah. I mean,
well, how has she been as a leader, though? What has she been doing the last 10 years?
I really can't say, because, I mean, she wasn't the leader when I was in Burma.
Yeah.
She's just sort of like a figurehead to the NLD, the National League for Democracy, which is like one of the main parties now.
So what have you heard about her leadership? Or is she just letting other people lead? Is she just a figurehead?
I haven't really heard much. She's turned into a politician, so she pisses off the Burmese sometimes. Like, there's a copper mine not far from where I was staying in the north that's pretty much just owned by the Chinese, and copper mines are really nasty. I mean, they use sulfuric acid to leach out the copper metal out of the ore and this kind of stuff. And there's just these big ponds of like sulfuric acid, and it's like killing off the soil. The farmers can't grow crops there anymore, and people are getting sick and all this. And Aung San Suu Kyi, she just said, well, the Chinese are just such a valuable like economic allies that we just can't really do anything about it. And so she's sort of taking the side of the Chinese and the big crony capitalists or whatever against the common people, which had the common people pretty pissed off at her for a while. But now I guess she's redeemed herself a little bit by taking the side of the Burmese Buddhists against the Rohingyas.
So now she's just a politician making she's politicians just compromise.
Yeah, she's just degenerated into kind of a mealy-mouthed politician.
Yeah, I guess I won't ask you too much about the future of Burma. It's mainly history. Yeah, I wanted a thorough. It's good we've been doing this over an hour and a half, but I wanted a thorough history. This is really interesting to me. I'm glad we did this. Why didn't we do this a year ago?
No, I don't know. Yeah, it just occurred to me that we talk about Burma sometimes, and most people in the West just are clueless as to what's going on. I remember one time I was living way the hell out in this really remote area. And there were these village guys. I was leaving, and these village guys were coming along with me. We're like hiking through the woods, and they're like sitting by the campfire at night, conspiring. They're like talking politics. These two hillbillies. It's like they're like insurgents or something. And I told them, the best thing that the Burmese could possibly do is to beg the British to come back, because it was like. Burma was like the richest, most prosperous country in Southeast Asia while under the British Raj. And then almost immediately after they got independence, it just like nosedived into like civil war, and just they became the poorest country in Southeast Asia. Yeah. Which happened all over the world. I mean, colonialism is just considered to be automatically bad. You're not even allowed to.
Look at Rhodesia. It was like a bread basket for Africa, exporting food, and then under Zimbabwe just implodes,
Yeah.
Under Mugabe.
Maybe I should study up on this. Maybe like make a list of all the countries now that were like European colonies.
South Africa was really good.
Well, pretty much all of Africa, except for like Liberia and maybe Ethiopia. Yeah. In Southeast Asia, all this. So just how many of them just immediately collapsed into like civil war and coups and military dictatorships and just complete fiascos? Probably be a very large percentage.
Yeah. Well, this video, we're being quite politically correct, so I won't discuss the racial differences causing African implosion. We'll say that we do that in other videos. This is a politically correct video.
Yeah, but I've often said the worst disaster that ever befell Burma was independence from the British Empire.
Wow. Well, thanks for saying that. I needed to hear that myself. I had this kind of thinking too about independence, and I guess I've always revered Burma. All my years and 4 years in Thailand, I never made it there. I guess there's partly, I guess it was just the money, and maybe it's a bit more restricted at that time. I think you could only go for a short time.
Yeah,
But I always revered. I always thought it was more Buddhist than Thailand. I always heard good things about Buddhism in Burma, and the monks there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the Thai monks are stricter in their practice of the rules. They're following the rules. But the Burmese, they're much better scholars, just phenomenal scholars. You know, there was several that memorized the entire 40-volume Burmese Tipitaka.
Yeah, in the Guinness Book of World Records, the person with the best memories, Burmese monk has memorized volumes.
Yeah, Mingon Tipitaka Darasiaro.
Oh, very good. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I could keep going on history. Anything else you want to add to 2,000 years of Burmese history? Well, we went back 50,000 years.
Yeah. Yeah, if you said we've already been talking for an hour and a half, so I guess probably we should call it good.
Yeah, an hour and 40 minutes. So thank you very much, Venerable Panabasa, for the history lesson. I appreciate it.
Yeah, you're welcome.